if you are not actively engaging with it, then not only am I going to be lonely, but you may have some questions that I could help answer or we could answer together. So, kind of in this first one, and Sean, since you kicked us off, I can ask you, what's culture? Like when we're talking about culturally responsive education and when we're talking about, especially with children's lit, what is culture?
Wow, I cannot believe you just put me on the spot like that, Jordan. Um, I think that's why I'm here. I feel like culture for me is always evolving, right? And it really is so rooted in one's individual interests, individual needs that is tapped into culture and their own identity. But I'll be honest, it's something that I'm constantly seeking and searching for.
I appreciate it. Anybody else want to hop off mic? I just need one person. Talk to me. What is culture? Are they going to do it? Sasha, thank you for volunteering. Oh, way to show leadership.
It's like you would bring me in. Um, I think so. In culture, for me, a lot of times is, as you grow up, it has very complex, right? It's many layers. There's a lot of intersectionality that's built into it. Um, so culture for me over the years has been really exploring how language, customs, traditions, practices really are embodiment of who you are and your identity. And so when I talk about culture, those are things that I really think about. How does this show up for you? And then what is your perspective on the world? And then how does it help you collaborate with others and see perspectives differently? So for me, that is a lot of culture.
All right. So, in the context of what we're going to talk about, I'm going to show you all a slide right after this so that we can look at how culture shows up in our classroom libraries. I love sharing books. So if you see one in here and you're like, I really need to steal that from my classroom library, that's why it's in here. Okay. But so often when we're talking about culture in our classrooms, we do a lot of kind of that little c culture. We talk about the amazing foods that different groups have, and we talk about the great fashion, and we'll look at, clothes from around the world. We'll tell folk stories. We'll build them into our studies, not just our Greek mythology, but let's look at indigenous people's folk tales and histories through that way. We'll talk about the different ways that people celebrate. Quite often, they talk about that concept of, food, fashion, folklores, fiestas, and then obviously famous people, right? We love talking about the exemplars of individual groups. This is where a lot of our work tends to center. And quite honestly, it's where a lot of our work tends to stop. Uh, and so, what that little c culture understanding does is it tends to be a foundational understanding. It's that first entry point to a lot of what people know, right? You've read My Friend Martin, and now you have been exposed to Martin Luther King Jr., and so you have some rough estimate about what it was like for Black people or during the 1960s. But what it doesn't give you is that kind of insider perspective. And that's what we mean when we talk about big C culture and kind of why we're here. It's the way that cultures talk about their own story. So it's one thing to look at the fashion of a quinceañera, right? And we love sharing books and looking at how beautiful they are. It's another for someone to talk about what goes into choosing the dress, why certain colors, why certain forms. And it's that insider perspective that helps create this richness of life that oftentimes helps us better understand the people that we're navigating. We also talk about just daily life when if you are only using books that show how big or how great some people were, then what you're actually missing is what it's like for them to just be regular people. And so another part of kind of that big C culture that we're hoping to hone into with our books is kind of that heart work. It's really easy for me to talk about a holiday. I can tell you the dates, the history, that kind of gets at the head work of it. I can tell you that Kwanzaa starts December 26th. We have 7 principles. Boom. What does it mean, though, to navigate those principles? What does it mean for a family to celebrate, to go through those practices? And that's how we use little c culture, those initial building blocks, to really expand the conversation that we're having. And I'm sure you're going, but Jordan, are all of my books little c? So I love The Sandwich Swap. I think it's one of the sweetest books ever. For those of you who don't know the Sandwich Swap, one girl brings a hummus sandwich to lunch. The other girl brings a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. They say mean things about each other's sandwiches. It boils down into a food fight. We ultimately figure out that, hey, everyone has different food. Boom. This is a great entry point to talking about the differences in culture and cuisine and what those types of staples of individual cultures are. But every day isn't going to end in a food fight. Every single person isn't going to have a knockdown, drag out fight with their best friend over peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It help like so when we talk about little c, even though they have this great entry point, you're oftentimes looking from the outside in, right? So I see the disagreement happening between two friends. I see the challenges that they're facing. I see how they reconcile, but I'm not getting that rich inner world that's actually going to tell me why these things are important. And so we use them all the time. Yes, I'm throwing a new one in there because if you haven't heard about Bayard Rustin, very important historical figure, right? They're close to Windows. Oftentimes, when they talk about the experiences that some of our famous people went through, they'll tell you that it was hard being Black and queer. They'll tell you that there was segregation, that people were mean to them and it made their feelings hurt. And while it does expose us to these historical figures, it is great. It still doesn't get into the highs and lows that humanize them. Because one of the things that we often do is we exemplify culture through the historical pillars, kind of those big moments, not fully acknowledging through the rest of our work that it's the day to day that often matters, that it's those just regular moments that define the treatment and experiences of groups. And then maybe they aren't windows, but they're peepholes. Nuri Means Light is just a beautiful book about a early childhood student figuring out that everyone's names are different and some people's names mean things. And she wants to know what her name means. That's the start of a conversation about where people's names come from. And it's a great entry point. It's not necessarily a window, but it's a beginning. So it's the first time for some people that they may even be able to look outside and see there's a thing about me and there's a thing about other people. All right. So, real quick, you all are going to take 30 seconds. I want you to drop like all of the books that you think of when you think of like little C culture. 30 seconds, go. Just drop them in the chat for me, both because I want to talk about them, but also so you can steal other people's book ideas. Go. Okay, let's see. We got Too Many Tamales, House on Mango Street, Amazing Grace. I love Amazing Grace, right? Black Boy. So Black Boy gives us this really deep understanding. Richard Wright actually dove into some of the heavier concepts. And so we're going to talk more about those in the other end. But Red, the crayon story, that's right. So these initial conversations about difference often shape and color our first impressions. And it's why it's so important for our ECE people that if we're not giving them those peepholes, those first pinpricks that there is a world outside of me, because kids are self-centered. Often when we say that, we're being mean, like this person is self-centered. What we mean is they literally do not understand the world outside of how they see themselves, right? So Nuri Means Light, she understands that her name means something finally, and that helps her put context to other people's names. But Jordan, we need to talk about mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. You are right. So mirrors, boom, really simple. I look in a book, I can see myself. I can see my experiences. They are reflected back at me. Windows, I can learn about other people, places, things, those experiences. When I'm reading it, I'm getting the opportunity to see the world out there. And then sliding doors, I am able to experience it, right? I can enter into the book world through my imagination. I can engage with it. It's rich. And in some ways, it's a lot like taking these things a step further and giving me the full experience. So, what's it look like in practice? Milo imagines the world, beautiful book. And remember that depending on the components of identity, one book can do a lot of entry work for different students. So Milo is drawing pictures on the bus, on the train, and he really just starts thinking about who are all of these people that I'm seeing. He envisions their life, their highs, their lows. You see the actual transition from of someone just living their life utilizing public transportation. And then you find out that he's going to visit a family member who's incarcerated. Well, I don't have a family. I've never visited a family member that's incarcerated. That's a window to me. Getting to actually see him go through the metal detector, seeing how they drew sitting at the table and a parent in a jumpsuit and him showing the artwork. That's a glimpse into what that experience is. It's a mirror for me though, because I've taken public transportation all the time. I know what it's like to sit there and really think about, I wonder where that person is going. I wonder why they're doing that. I know that experience. So I can connect to him in that way. And so where there is difference in our experiences, I'm still able to connect to him because I can see a part of my identity reflected back to me. And then that sliding glass door, that ability to experience it, the way that they show even distance and space, you're able to be there with him because you're able to connect. It's that next step further. We don't just want, like, the problem with showing people life through a window is they get to see the experience, but until we connect it to that heart work, it just stays it often can become a specialized kind of understanding. It can lead to some stereotyping because we never give the thoughts and feelings associated with it. It's like the students had no idea Milo was visiting an incarcerated parent. Yes, for the entirety of the book it looks like a kid going anywhere. You don't find that out until the end, and that makes the whole world of difference because you get to see a completely different experience. Let's keep going. Right? There is a book, Granny's Kitchen. Oh, great one. Right? She wants to cook Jamaican food like her grandmother, and every time she tries, she makes a mistake. She goes and talks to her grandma, and in the same way that a lot of grandparents are, she doesn't actually tell her anything except stories about, well, this is how I did it, or this is what I figured out. But through that, you're seeing Jamaican recipes. We're still hitting that food kind of thing, right? You are getting to see the richness of their land. But let's see, right? Because there is a mirror there. I remember cooking with my grandparent. A window. I've never been to Jamaica. I'm looking at this life. I never had recipes handed down in the same way. And the richness of the experience, the frustration, the search for help, that's that sliding glass door. That's that connection to intergenerational wisdom that helps me ground myself in the understanding. All right, I'm going to show you one more. Let's do this. See, I even said, okay, one more. I had to help. Because often when we have these conversations, right, because we know what's at stake for our marginalized groups, when we talk about culture, we forget that sometimes what we want to highlight are kids with their everyday lives and the experiences that matter most to them. Alex has two homes. He has a home with his mom, he has a home with his dad. Those homes are very different. And so this is also the life of some of your students that will be reflected back at them. So instead of me telling you all about that one, since I just gave you a brief description, who might this be a mirror for? Someone can come off mute because, yeah, now I will just start randomly calling on not just NLU employees. Yeah, Katrina, I saw that face you made, but I wasn't going to call you out. Don't worry, I got you. So you all can volunteer yourselves or I can volunteer you. Who might this be a window for? Y'all gonna make me do it.
a few students in my classroom, preschool classroom,
How so?
because I have some kids that live with mom, but goes to visit dad sometimes. And then I have some that's that stays with auntie and they're in a foster home and they go to see their mom also.
Thank you so much for
And it's
sharing.
different.
Yeah. So getting the opportunity to see different families, how different families negotiate
Hi.
things.
Oh, sorry.
What else we got? No, come on with it.
Oh, I was gonna say, it's the same for me. I have students in my classroom as well who they often say, I was at my dad's house or at my mom's house, I can't do this, or at my dad's house, I have help with my homework, but at my mom's house, I don't. So it is definitely something that's very common. I'm also a parent of whose children go between two houses. So it's definitely something that is happening in the classrooms for sure.
100%. So there's our mirrors. How do you think this how do you think this could function as an effective window? So giving other people the opportunity to look at a life that isn't necessarily theirs. How might this help?
In some ways, if you have a child whose parents are in the process of going through a divorce um, or something else that is making the household, become two homes, it could be a way to just prepare them for the possibility of what's going to happen.
Absolutely. How else?
It could also give the educator insight of how that child may be feeling. I've never read Two Homes, but I'm sure in the book it does. The child maybe sparks up conversation or even talks about how they're feeling about going between two homes or being in two homes.
I'll actually tell you, no. So one of the beauties of this book and where we often can get into a sliding glass door, and it's a thing that I like to be mindful of. Often when we do this culture work, and the reason I wanted to introduce some of this concept of big C and little c, we go to the pain points, right? We don't just talk about our cultural icons that are positive things. And even when we do, because we know how marginalized groups are, we talk about how they always had to overcome. Alex is just a happy kid. He tells you that he has a chair at his mom's house. He has a chair at his dad's house. He puts his shoes here. He puts his shoes there. He does his homework here. He does his homework there. And so, in letting it be a sliding glass door, what I always want us to be mindful of is when we're showing students different experiences, to not put the understandings that we think they may have because what may seem like a traumatic experience, right? Like, yes, it is the truth that a lot of people have two homes. Because of that, not everyone's experience with having two homes is negative. Alex just gets to live his life. And while that may not be the case for everyone, by allowing them to step into that world and have that discussion, you can get a lot of information about how people view it and how they can navigate it. Absolutely, to help them understand that our friends live differently. And so here are some considerations that I want us to be able to make because often when we talk about what we want to represent, we start in that primary circle, right? So we show diverse books that have racial diversity, and we don't think about different parent structures. We want to show books that may have, Granny's Kitchen has intergenerational conversations. What about language? What about, different appearance? So we talk about colorism. There is an amazing book called You're My Peanut Butter Big Brother. And it's about how everyone in the family is a different shade of brown and what it's like for them to navigate that, because that is also a component of their identity. And so when we're showing these mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, remember that we are talking about more than just one aspect of their identity. And as you're looking at your library, look at what's being prioritized or focused on. How are you giving spaces for people to navigate that? Because at the intersection of all of that, all of these factors are what make up that student that's in front of you. But man, that's a lot of stuff to have to take into account, which is why you don't do it with one book. You don't do it with two, and you don't expect one book to do everything, right? How many times, if I had a nickel for every time someone told me the Watsons go to Birmingham was my experience, like That is great. It gave me a sliding glass door because it is so graphic and real, and I understand the bombing. I was not there. I did not live through those things. However, it does help me understand a certain level of experience. There are some things that help me understand what it's like to be a Black male in a different family situation. That's true. But so I would always encourage you, think about the aspects of identity that you're looking to highlight in your classroom library. Think about the ways in which you want your students to be seen and how you want them to see the world around them. So now, this is where I am going to say, I'm going to do a thing, but I wanted to open up questions of all kinds and sorts before we do a thing. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can just talk for a second, because I think that there are a lot of things that are sparked, especially with you all who have proven yourself infinitely wise and questioning. So help me out. What things are sitting with you at the moment? What questions come to mind? What do you have?
I think, well, one thing that, oh, sorry.
Go
One
ahead.
thing that kind of stands out to me is just how much power we have as educators to sort of normalize children's experiences so that they don't have to feel stigma or they don't have to feel different, even if their life may be somewhat different than the kids in their classroom. Because in different school environments, some patterns, may be more prevalent or more, common than others, depending on, the neighborhood or socioeconomics or whatever. But we have the power to, use those windows and doors and mirrors and all of that to expand their worldview so that they can see that just because a child may look different in one setting, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with their life experience.
100%. So when you think about the role of an educator and incorporating this into your educational setting, what changes do you envision yourself making based off of what we've already talked about? So again, based off of what we've talked about, what changes do you envision making in your practice? That wasn't just for Katrina either. I will call people. So help me.
Hi, this is Susan. So I guess it's just making me think about the books that I even read as an adult, whether they are just being those mirrors or if they're those sliding doors. Is there just a person of, a different culture in the book that I'm reading and that's just part of the book? Or am I learning about something different? So I think, just obviously it's a little harder to look through books in early childhood to find ones that actually give that experience more than just you know, just the mirror. But I think obviously it's important still to have the mirror. But I think for myself, I would be looking more for those experiences so that they can actually understand, not just see themselves reflected. And that even myself as an educator, that I don't just have what is the second term windows. I don't just see the windows. I actually want that sliding door,
Absolutely. And then I think the other thing to remember, your context. So a lot of the work that I do takes me around the state. For a lot of people, Milo's book is a window because they live in rural Illinois. And if you're not thinking about your context and how that shifts what your library looks like, then you're also not really beefing it up. Because if you only got books about urban living, then yes, that is a great mirror. But some of the simplest changes that they're going to make, they will encounter people from different states. They will encounter people from the rural parts of a state. And so, as much as we often highlight the diversity of experience in other countries, which we still need to do so that we show them those experiences, remember that there is diversity very much in the life. If you have students who see people living in houses, some of the most recent books are starting to show people that live in apartments and what that's like living in a different life. There is an entire unit on living with homelessness, which is an entirely different culture that is a window to an experience that many of our students will never have, but it does help them understand, right? So, see, we had general question. How do I continue to expand my knowledge and protect the severity of the information I pass along to my future students? Okay, so very few rules that I've lived by in this teaching experience. No tragedies before third grade. Now, what does that mean? Doesn't mean we don't talk about all of the big bad things that happen in the world. However, I've tried to be mindful not to knock them down to the point that they can't get back up, right? So I remember with my fourth graders, we read Number the Stars in a chunk because it's Number the Stars and it's what you read. The question I would have is, are like right now, you're assuming you know what your students' capability of understanding trauma and bigger topics are. When we're talking about students who've already lived through a pandemic, a racial uprising, many of them have lived through transitions of homes. Many people lost their houses at the end of the pandemic when the moratorium on evictions was up. So I think the first thing I would always encourage educators at any level is you need to know your students, engage what they can handle. Because if I told you right now, these are the only things that a first grader could handle, I don't know your kids. That said, that's where we talk about little C and big C type culture books working together. Maybe we start with a book about, where certain traditions come from. And then maybe we get deeper into what that experience is. There is a great one. It's called like the Paper Kingdom. I will find it, but you follow this young Asian American boy as he has this amazing imagination. He goes to work with his parents, and it is super beautiful. What you find out is essentially that his parents are incredibly poor, and they are taking him to work with them every day. But he envisions it as his mom and dad being kings and queens and ruling over this entire place. Yeah, that's going to be someone's experience. That's going to help them normalize it. That's going to help them relate to it. And when they speak, then other people in your class will have some context of empathy and understanding for what they go through.
Jordan,
Yes,
yes, you're right in that, because I've had, oh my God, I was an interventionist one year for second grade, and some of the stories that they would bring to me, the mother's boyfriends, they called fake dad. One mother was pregnant when the child left home that morning, but when he got back, she wasn't. Bed bug bites, fathers incarcerated. So they're carrying so much in their shoulders, and it's so good now that we have stories that can relate or open conversations for the children, because they carry so much on their little shoulders.
absolutely. And so, what I would encourage you all to do, and here's where I'm going to go into teaching mode, which means I'm going to let you all take notes. So, I'm going to give you just a few steps that I tend to think about these things through. May not work for everybody else, but it's what I've generally found, right? When I'm trying to figure out the type of books that I want to navigate with my students, first, what is their capacity for understanding? And that may seem like a heavy question, but when I think about Nuri Means Light, it is such a simple and sweet book. And so if I'm using that, what is their capacity to understand that people's names mean things? What's their capacity to understand that people's names come from different languages? What's their capacity to have a conversation of what does my name mean? So first, assessing what that capacity for understanding is. What do I want them to do with the information from this book? And I know we're teachers, we're always thinking assessment backwards. I'm not talking about assessment in that regard. What do I want them to do? At the end of Nuri Means Light, she goes home and asks her parents, what does my name mean? When we think about assessment, you're going to think about, hey, what are the reading skills that they're going to get from this? What are the vocabulary that they're going to develop? But if I'm asking, what do I want them to do with this? Oftentimes, I'm going to come up with the human elements of it. How do I want them to treat each other in class? How do I want them to feel about themselves? What do I want them to do with whatever example I just showed them? And then obviously, how am I going to keep building on this? Right? If we're talking about names, great. Then I may bring in a little C book that talks about someone that either has a famous name or has a unique name, someone who might have been ridiculed for their name, right? There are other ways that I can string that together. And then, as always, what are the things that may be blind spots for me? And oftentimes, hey, I don't know if everyone's name has a positive story. I don't even know if all of my kids in my class are using their first name. because I've definitely had it where I thought the kid's name was one thing, but it was their middle name or a nickname. And so just by acknowledging that you may have a blind spot, if it's a nickname, your pivot is already built in. I love that. Can you tell me about like where does that nickname come from? But because you can acknowledge that there may be blind spots, you can better prepare for that. Make any sense? What other questions do you have? What other things are coming up for you? Questions, cares, comments, concerns?
I will say, Professor, um, like you said, looking at the books that we currently have and seeing how we can apply the mirror, the window, and the sliding glass door concepts, and especially with like young preschoolers, kindergartners, pre-K kids, and kindergartners and school and first graders, just trying to kind of reevaluate what we already have, but still apply um, kind of current knowledge.
So children's lit is amazing because I would use it in high school too. They would act like they didn't want to see it, but then they would love it. When you've got a really good children's lit book, that is one of the best entryways to buy some cool points. But the other thing is it tries to keep things simple. And one of the reasons that children's lit is so impactful is because we distill our cultural values down to their most digestible points in children's lit, right? You are getting the bite-sized edition, the easiest way to understand it. And because of that, we can do a few things because if we don't do it right, we can also breed bias because they are serving as a window. If we don't help them get additional context around certain identities, if that is the only thing they're seeing, then their limited understanding will breed stereotypes and biases. Chimamanda Adozi, oh, no, I always mess up her name and I apologize, but in her TED talk about the danger of a single story, she talks about stereotypes. The problem with them is that they're incomplete, right? It isn't just that you are getting the wrong image of a people, it's that you're getting an incomplete image. And so the real big question is, how is our work with mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, and a lot of that, how are we helping them get a more complete picture of the people around them in all of their diverse richness? Thank you, Chimamanda Adichie. Like, that's what your children's library has to do at all levels, right? And it gets really difficult because there is always this pushback about what are we going to do with time? And I will say, all right, you're going to be with me on a little controversial streak, and I know they're recording it, and my bosses are here, but we're going to say this, okay? If you still have time to teach Dr. Seuss, you have time to look for new books. We know enough about some of our classic authors that while we are not removing their historical impact, we are doing a disservice to our students by letting them hold the same level of space that they used to. And so it doesn't mean that my kiddo doesn't have a copy of The Cat in the Hat around here. We just don't read it that much because I know better about Dr. Seuss and I can help her understand rhyme and meter and pattern a lot easier where she still feels seen. And so when you're trying to figure out, well, how am I going to incorporate this? It's very easy to start thinking about everyone wants to add a book, but if I'm going to add, what does this need to replace? Yeah, you're gonna struggle to find Dr. Seuss books in Spanish. Eric Carle, there is a bilingual edition of Papa Get the Moon for Me. Papa, por favor, bájame la luna. It does both. It has all of the richness of the artwork, and they've done all of Eric Carle's books in Spanish as well. So The Very Hungry Caterpillar is in Spanish, right? And think about what that does. You are now giving a linguistic window. You are affirming people's language in space and can use that to transition. They've even done a Southwest edition of the Three Little Pigs called Los Tres Javelinas, because javelinas are um, little pigs that are down in the southwestern region, but they redid the entire story so that it's more reflective for that group. Right? What's up?
The purple team won.
The purple team won. We are doing a talk. Say hi to the people.
Hi.
No, go away. Thank you. I couldn't help it. Okay, she just busted in. So those are the things that we want to think about. What are we holding space for in our classrooms? Because the other thing that you show kids about your values are what you have in your room. Imagine I'm in your class the entirety of the time, and we've read every single book about Dr. Seuss. And then I go to high school and I have Miss Sasha, and I find out a lot of his views on race. And I feel a bit betrayed, right? That cognitive dissonance is not something that we have to grapple with. Yes, the book that was in Spanish. Papa, por favor, bájame la luna. Papa, please get the moon from me, from Eric Carle. There's also Los Tres Javelinas, the Three Little Pigs. And there are just a ton of great books. The other thing that we've also seen are the diversity of stories that are coming up. And there is one called Two Ponds by T. Bui, which talks about a Vietnamese immigrant parent and his child, and him trying to, still maintain some of their cultural understandings. And so, what I want you all to think about when you're doing these books, again, affirm different components of identity. And this is what makes your task both easier and harder. If I want to have a book about a parent and child relationship, even if the race is different, I can still have discussions around the parent and child relationship and give them both a mirror about a parental relationship and a window into a different culture. Then the work becomes the conversations that you have around it. Because one of the highest levels of culture work is affirmation and critique. So when we move past just stereotyping, and we can see some of the things about cultures that hold us back, that make our lives a little difficult. I know we all talk about the generational traumas and gifts that we get. The ability to have those discussions is a higher level of culture work. But that takes trust, that takes understanding, and it begins with a lot of the work that you all are doing in something as simple as your read alouds, because you affirm that their culture is normal, relevant, to be celebrated, to be seen, and not just because they have special days. It's the everyday things that matter. Again, questions, cares, comments, concerns, what's coming up for you? Talk to me. Don't let me just sit here by myself. Edwin, I appreciate that you have no questions for me, but it makes it a little hard. Not gonna lie. At this point, you all just want book recommendations, don't you? All right. I am so very serious because you all have me for a little bit. Give me 2 minutes. I'm actually going to go raid my daughter's library, and I'm going to run through a bunch of books. So this will be fun. Give me like a minute and a half.
If you would like to know what some of the NLU faculty and staff are reading, we could create a list and share it out with everyone too. Some recommendations that we have.
You also can take 220. I encourage you to take Edu 220, which is all about children's literature, regardless of what level you teach, because kids' books are awesome. All right, so our first one here is fry bread. Okay, so one, yes, Jordan, you said that food is little c. I did. I also said it was a great entry point. One of the things that it does is talk about the entirety of the history of the family. It talks about where fry bread comes from, how different recipes have taken place. And then it has a very deep conversation about the role that fry bread has in the history of indigenous peoples. There's a great start. Now, I would not be me if I didn't radicalize you. And if you need to teach your kids the alphabet, A is for activist, also comes in Spanish. So if you are trying to help them and you want to radicalize your library just a little bit, just very simple things like, oh, I don't know, V is for Vox, the voice of the people. T is for trains, tiaras, tulips, tractors. Oh, and tigers, because tigers are in there too. That's pretty cool. Though everyone is familiar with Sulwe. I love Sulwe because one of the things that we often don't talk about in diverse cultures, but it is a thing that cuts across many of ours, is colorism. Um, I know that it is not exclusive to the African American community, and we know the harm that it can have on a lot of people's understandings of self. And so Stillway has this amazing conversation around colorism, and while it is unique, hold my books up. I am, Mila. Okay. Sulwe tackles colorism in a lot of ways, and so that's a great entry point for some of our students. Oh my goodness, here we go. Life Doesn't Frighten Me. This is a poem by Maya Angelou, but the paintings are by Jean-Michel Basquiat. This one, again, is just a really great entry point. You can have a conversation around Maya Angelou. That one is more just because I thought it was cool in the library. Give me a second. Yep. Reading Beauty. Now, here is where the English teacher in me will always tell you that Sleeping Beauty is kind of weird because he kisses someone who's asleep. That's kind of a problem. Reading Beauty tells the same story, except Princess Lex is cursed to potentially get a paper cut and fall asleep because of a fairy. But it turns out her true love is actually her dog because he loves everyone. All right. So when we're also thinking about this, what are the values and things associated? Because Lex is doing a traditional story. The things that are changed can be changed from some of our classic stories. Oh my goodness, I'm running out of time and I have so many books. I will have to do a great one. We talked about Amazing Grace. And if you haven't gotten Amazing Grace, it's just great. The Year We Learned to Fly by Jacqueline Woodson. This has just become my TED Talk on books that you should have in your classroom library. Now, when we still talk about those little C books, remember that there is nothing wrong with them. And I'm going to say that a lot because whenever we have these conversations, everybody goes the opposite direction and starts buying all the new books that they're like, this is the deepest culturally relevant book that I could possibly find. That is awesome. You still want to introduce them to people that they may not ever fully encounter. So this one is called Harlem's Little Blackbird, and it's the story of Florence Mills. So as you're thinking about how to get them into some of these conversations, think about the historical figures that are often left out, right? There is a graphic novel about the history of the Black Panther Party, and they talk about Chairman Fred Hampton and how they had a breakfast program, not because of any other reason. These are stories that we often neglect in the ability to highlight other people. Rocket says, look up. And so this is about a little girl who wants to be an astronaut. It shows you urban living, intergenerational families and conversations. It introduces the concept of being an astronaut. And if you love this one, Maya and the Robot by Dr. Eve Ewing is a great step up in this same vein for middle schoolers. And I will do one more. There is an entire series from Letitia and Perry where it's Skin Like Mine, Hair Like Mine, and ABC's I Love Me. Do I have any books? Do I have any for books in a rural community? Farm life. I do. Email me. It is jlandfair at nl.edu. Email me. I need to go back into my kiddo's library. But yes, and that's the thing that we can keep working on as well, is building out these libraries. If you are getting them, you can also use First Books. They give great discounts and they will give you full sets. They also have like these bulk orders where you can get class sets for $10 to $20, quite honestly, of really diverse books, because the intent is putting diverse books into the hands of teachers and students. And so here is where I will say, in my own little way, you all are already doing a great job. The major questions that you have to ask yourself after this are, what are the books that I'm more than willing to let go of? And I think we hold on to so many of them, not because we don't think that we could do better, but because of the emotional relationship we have with them. But I would challenge you then that if you can see the value in some of these new ones, that why wouldn't you develop that emotional relationship for your students and then change your perspective on it? If you're holding on to a book so tightly in your class because this was the one that helped me, that's awesome. But you're doing your students a disservice if it'll help them see themselves better. And so really think about, what are the experiences that you're trying to give your students? What are the understandings that you're trying to give your students? What's the life that you want your students to truly live? And I often couch that with, I we work, we attend and work at a college. I know that there are different paths for everyone. So when I say, what life do I want them to have? How are you going to help them be empathetic? How are you going to help them be considerate? How are you going to help them contribute to the world? And if you can think about those larger questions, what components of their identity need to be embraced for them to do that? And how can I help them see that in my class? Oh my goodness. Can I send a list of compiled books? Yes. Yes. I will sit and I will give Sean and his team my list of books to go out. You are welcome. Other questions before I leave, other than getting all of the secrets of my classroom library and my home library? All right. I'm done. Sean, you got me. Out.
Jordan, I loved it. I think I speak on behalf of everyone. You are a wealth of knowledge. It is such a pleasure to have you this evening. Thank you. Thank you for the list. I just wanted to share with everybody our exit slip in the chat. For those of you that are with us tonight, your feedback matters. Also, what I'd like to do is just take a second really quickly before we all can come off mic, say what we want, and give Jordan our thanks. But I wanted to share my screen too really quickly, just to let us all see that this is the session. I'm going to share this link in the chat as well. If you don't have this schedule for our culturally responsive knowledge cafe, I definitely urge you to get your hands on it. I'm going to share it in the chat. Our upcoming session is February 20th on a Tuesday, and it is refocusing teacher approaches through a restorative practices lens, featuring our presenter, Walter Taylor, who is an adjunct coach, adjunct professor, and an adjunct teacher development coach, and also the director of professional development with the Chicago Teachers Union. If you loved what you saw tonight, and I'm sure you did, with Jordan, please make sure that you grab a hold of the schedule. I'm going to put it in the chat after this, and make sure to join us for our next session. A couple of things. Jordan's going to get us this list. We're also going to send out to everybody that was here tonight a videotaped recording of tonight's session. We're also going to share Jordan's amazing PowerPoint, so you have access to a lot of this. I hope you are all taking notes, and please spread the word to other NLU educators. We are looking to really build our community and to share with each other. So with that, Jordan, again, I just want to say, and to all of you, the dedication is palpable. It's amazing. We really appreciate you, Jordan, and all of you who are here sharing, who are here part of this. We hope to see everybody's faces again. These series, I can't say enough about it. It's really the very best of what NLU offers. So please come back and join us. We look forward to seeing you. All right, Jordan, thank you so much, sir.
I'm only sharing my list if they go get their library cards. That's what we said. Your public library needs you. And quite honestly, they use the number of library cards in the first quarter to determine like its general usage. So now, when it warms up, is a great time to go get your library card. In the words of Arthur, it's not hard with a library card.
And so folks have the link for the exit slip. And now I just posted the link for the schedule. Make sure you have your digital copy, share it around to folks. We want to see more people and really build out these sessions as we move through the year. Jordan, thanks for warming up our cold evening. And to the rest of you, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next month.
Thanks, everyone. Hopping off. Have a good night.